Hello everyone and welcome to my Final Fantasy overview video. So much like my Rift video, if you had a chance to watch it, I'm basically going to be going through what this game is. So I assume you know absolutely nothing about this game, and I'm going to talk through the structure of the game, maybe some dungeons, and then kind of go through some summary. So I'm going to keep it really high level, really focused on multiboxing and why you would want to play this game. And then I'll talk to about maybe some frustrating points, right? So kind of a part of introduction to this would be that back when input broadcasting was still allowed in World of Warcraft, it was very uncommon for people to multibox Final Fantasy XIV. In fact, a lot of people that I talked to would say that it wasn't possible. Those same people are now multiboxing with us, and we're putting forth an effort to see the viability of this long term. But I think it's important to phrase this whole conversation around this is a game that 6 months ago nobody would have tried to multi-box because of the challenge and the infeasibility of it. And today we are not necessarily forced into playing it, right? You can play any game you want, but it is kind of the best option on the market right now, at least in my opinion. So let's go ahead and get into it, right? So the first thing you should know is that this is a very story-focused game. It's very much focused on the story. You have to play through the story, and it's very long. So I've heard figures around 200 to 300 hours just to get through the main scenario quest line. So let me take a step back and explain kind of what the main scenario quest line is. So in this game, there's what's called a main scenario quest, or MSQ. And you must level through that. There's no getting around it. You have to go through that quest in order to move on. And I actually really love their implementation of it, right? So what that actually means is that when an expansion launches, right, or I'm sorry, when the initial game launched, they have the MSQ for the original game. And then as they added content patches along the original game, they added on to the MSQ. Then when the expansion dropped, they had more MSQ for those leveling ranges. And then with the content patches at the end game, that also got added to the MSQ. So here we are, 3 expansions later, and there's a ton of content, which means the main scenario questline is really long. However, they did shorten it a little bit, tried to make it a little bit more friendly, and ultimately it feels really good. One complaint that I often got from like friends or family that wanted to play World of Warcraft that had never played before was that they were missing part of the story, right? They never got to see the entire frame of mind, right? You basically play the story that you want to play for leveling, and then you skip the rest, right? You play through 1 to 55 or 60, and you might see like Burning Steps, but you never go into like Blackwing Lair, for instance. This game kind of solves that problem through their MSQ. And then one other thing, right? So the MSQ is tied to the character. One really cool feature of this game is just how the classes work in general. So rather than having to create an alt whenever I want to do some different role or class, they call them jobs in this game. So they do have a concept of class where you start out as a class and then at level 30 it becomes a job. Essentially, you can just think of jobs as classes, and you can play any job from your same character. Meaning, as long as you play the same character, you only have to do the MSQ once. And to level those alternate jobs, you don't have to do the MSQ at all. You can do side content. So you can really, like, as you play more jobs, explore more of the game. Now, personally, what I will say is that this isn't necessarily for me personally. I don't really care about the storyline in any game I play for the most part. The lore gets kind of interesting, and I really like the lore of, like, dungeons and raids. But everything outside of that, like all of the things that lead up to it, I'm not really as interested in. Just being like completely honest with you. That's just personally where I'm at. So it doesn't do that much for me, but I could absolutely see this being a huge draw-in for other players. And if you haven't played Final Fantasy, you absolutely should at least give it a shot. Even if you play it solo. You can play the trial up to level 60, which is really high. The max level in this game is level 80. So you can play all the way up to level 60 and really get a feel for the game without spending any money. Oh, and Black Friday is coming up at the end of the week, and it's very likely they're going to put the game on sale. So let's go ahead and talk about the dungeon structure a little bit. So the first thing you'll notice is that I'm only 4-boxing. And I'm only 4-boxing because the party size is 4. Raid content is 8. You certainly could multi-box it. I think you'd be crazy, given based off what I've seen thus far in the game, to do that. But hey, if that's what you want to do, go for it. Initially, they're not very difficult. The game really does a good job of slowly introducing you to the features of the game and the types of mechanics that you'll face in dungeons. The first couple dungeons are really only going to have 1 or 2 mechanics, and you're probably not going to spend too much time wiping on each individual boss. Later, however, once you get to about level 30, you're going to find that the dungeon content is going to get a little bit more difficult. You're going to see most bosses having 2 to 3 mechanics, and you're probably going to struggle with some, if not all, of the bosses. I'm at the point now, I'm level 50. I've done most of the entry-level dungeons, and Stone Vigil I just did recently, this level 41 dungeon, and I found that I was wiping to probably every boss at least 2 to 3 times once I knew the fight. Learning the fight, I could spend probably half an hour of wipes on it, and in total, I think it took me about 3 hours to do the first clear. To take another step back, one interesting thing about dungeons, and I can just enter one really quickly, just to show you, is that you get this little timer. So, I'm going to zone into the instance. You only get 90 minutes to complete this dungeon. So, and you get kicked out the second it ends. So, if I get to the last boss with 5 minutes left, and that boss takes me more than 5 minutes to kill, I'm getting kicked out of the dungeon the second that happens. Oh, this is a duty. I signed up for the wrong thing. Whatever, we'll skip it. You see that there's a timer. Along the MSQ, these trials, which are basically like one boss. You fight one boss and then that's it. And it's a quest line, and it's pretty challenging though. Every single one of them has taken me a considerable amount of time to beat. As you get higher and you get to higher levels, you'll notice that the dungeon content becomes very unforgiving. So bosses only have 2 or 3 mechanics, but you have to execute them perfectly. And if this was World of Warcraft and you had the same movement mechanics, that would actually not be that bad. You could absolutely handle all of that. However, in this game, one challenging piece of that is that some of the movement is a little clunky. So, for instance, I'm going to strafe on all my alts right now. Okay. Now, if you look at my alt screen, it's pretty quick. But if you look at this screen, my main screen, you'll notice it's not that quick at all. And same thing with follow, right? If I follow, it's going to be on a little bit of a delay. I got to put my markers up. Sorry, I'm using marker-based follow. It feels just really sluggish. Even though my character is there, I don't necessarily see it. And that doesn't play out very well in the end game. You kind of have to be able to anticipate where your character is going to be, not necessarily where it is. And when it comes to avoiding mechanics, they telegraph everything. So there will actually be a line that says this is where this ability is going. And when that line dissipates is when the actual calculation is done as to whether or not you're in that spell. Which is great. I think that's really cool. But there's so much of it, and you have to be so precise. And the second your characters get split up and moved like this, and you need to strafe around something, it becomes an absolute nightmare. So this game is going to be very challenging to do dungeons. And there's really, from what I can tell at the end game, there's really no additional add-on to the dungeons, right? There's no Mythic Plus, there's no reason to really grind them. So really, your approach in multiboxing this game should be to not to rush to endgame like you would in World of Warcraft and to immediately gear up, but really just enjoy the trip because it's going to be long, it's going to be very difficult from what I can tell already, and at the end of the day, it is fun. So that concludes the things I wanted to talk about today. Be on the lookout. I will be posting videos for each dungeon, kind of like as a little bit of a dungeon guide. If you've seen my past content, I typically would do difficult Mythic Plus dungeons, and I would just record them and talk over them and talk through them. It's more likely that I will record the video and then dub over it later. That's probably more likely the scenario. But I will probably make a separate one for each instance or dungeon. So if you're still kind of on the fence after watching this video and you are interested in Final Fantasy but aren't really sure what it has to offer, or maybe you're scared of how hard the dungeons are going to get at endgame, because I'll admit, right, I still haven't gotten that far in this game. So the dungeons could get even more difficult. They could get to the point where, like, this is so frustrating that I don't want to do it at all. That's completely a possibility. I will be making more videos, so just follow along, and have a good day.